Thank you, Jackie. It's always good to be here with Mark and Wayne. They do a great job with a lot of counties, and I think we're all on the same page in trying to keep people out of trouble. I'm really glad to see a lot of experts in the audience today from Carroll County, Henry County, Du Bois County, Hamilton County, Washington County, that have, Fountain County in particular, we've had a number of personnel issues there, but today's session is going to focus on the wage and hour laws, particularly the Fair Labor Standards Act and the Indiana wage statutes. But I wanted to follow up on a couple of the last questions that Wayne was fielding, one of which was on the grant-funded positions. I think it's really advisable to make sure that before you start hiring people under grants that you do have a job description for them, that it is adopted, that the salaries are set in line with the salaries that you have for your other full-time employees, and that the terms and conditions are set out in that job description, that in the event that the employee leaves, then the job no longer exists. So if anyone wants to contact our office, we have a little checklist of items for grant-funded positions and kind of a walkthrough, step-by-step process on how you kind of check off the boxes, make sure you have the job description, but also make sure that these grants are going to cover not only the salary, but any attendant benefits that the employees may be eligible. So there's kind of a hidden paycheck with a lot of these positions that people don't realize. So if you want to contact our office, Addie Rooker, many of you have dealt with Addie, or Lori Seeland, they'll be happy to send you that checklist for grant-funded positions. The session on today's session is really going to talk about the FLSA and how it is unique to the public sector. There's a number of items that are really special to administering these wage and hour policies that are unique to local government. So some of the things that apply to the private sector don't necessarily apply to the public sector. Others do. The calls that we get from county officials around the state usually involve the sticky wickets. And I know most employees come to work, most county officials come to work, they do a good job every day. We don't hear about that. We hear about, you're not going to believe what happened at work today. And that's usually how these calls begin. As an example, a county attorney calls and says, they always lead with this: I have a quick question for you. I know you'll have an answer, which immediately that's strike one. It may be a quick question, but it's usually a complicated answer. The attorney calls and said, I just left the county commissioners meeting, and we had the county highway superintendent in this morning, and he is claiming 360 hours of comp time that we owe him, and he wants a check, and his next check coming up here, he's going to be retiring soon, and we've got a bit of a debate over what to do. What's the debate? Well, I have one county commissioner that says we always pay off comp time and everybody's entitled to it, including the superintendent, and we need to pay him. We've got a second county commissioner who says, no way in hell. This guy was hired to perform a job, paid a salary, and we don't owe him anything, and that salary is supposed to cover all of his time work. What about the third guy? Well, the third guy's abstaining because it's his brother-in-law. And that's why we're calling you. Well, there's a number of things that are going to come into play here. And there's no quick answers. There are some answers to follow the rules, but there's also, what's the past practice around there? Well, many times in highway departments, everybody is going to get their comp time paid. All the truck drivers are, because why? They're not exempt. They are entitled to overtime after 40 hours, or either overtime pay or comp time, one of the two. And those jobs that are non-exempt throughout the county are required to receive overtime pay or comp time for all hours worked over 40 hours in a 7-day work week. Now that sounds simple, but it's not. Do we count the time off as hours worked or not? What if you take a vacation on Monday and you work 8 hours on Tuesday, you work 10 hours on Wednesday, 10 hours on Thursday, and you work 8 hours on Friday? Are those extra hours in the middle of the week going to count for time and a half? According to the FLSA, no. We don't owe overtime under FLSA. The person didn't actually work 40 hours in that work week. So that's problem number one. But problem number two is we've always counted it that way. We've always done it that way. And that's often the reason you get for methods of calculation or administrating these policies. Why are you doing that? Well, that's just the way we've always done it. The fire chief just down the road, not too far in a small town, says, we interviewed trying to figure out these jobs on overtime and who's eligible and who's not. Well, what we do here, and it's always worked out well for us, on January 1, we give all of our firefighters 96 hours of comp time. You do what? We give all of our firefighters 96 hours of comp time. It's just easier bookkeeping that way. I said, okay. What if a firefighter resigns or retires in February? Well, we've had that happen, and we paid them off before they've earned it. Yes. That's not the way to calculate overtime. And we're going to talk about some of those overtime calculations a little bit later here. But rest assured, all the employees pretty well know, I think as Wayne pointed out, if they've been working extra hours and they've been keeping track of time, they'll turn it in, and they'll want to be paid for it. And that includes people like the canine officer in Highland, Indiana, who turned in comp time and back pay for taking care of the dog. The dog? Yes, the dog. The canine officers in any police department are entitled for pay for care and grooming of the dog 365 days a year, unless the dog is kenneled. Okay? That's the off-duty time. That is not time they're actually coming on duty. That's the time they spent in their off-duty hours to take care and groom the dog. Well, after about 10 years on that police department, he turned in a back pay claim and got paid out about $8,000. Then he joined the Lake County Sheriff's Department. And 20 years later, he files the same claim, except this time he's got 12 other canine guys in on the lawsuit. It's turning into a retirement program. And in that particular lawsuit ended up costing the county well over $500,000 in back pay for care and grooming of the dog. And one guy had 2 dogs. He didn't. He was a detective. He didn't even take him out. He sat under his desk, but he was there. And old old Rennie got the guy a little extra money there at retirement. So those are the kinds of things that happen, and we're going to come back to this absence of any record keeping. The DOL or a federal court will take the time of the employee over no record at all. Now, back to our highway guy. Is he a non-exempt employee entitled to overtime or not? I would guess in a majority of the counties in Indiana, that job is classified as exempt, and that person is paid on a salary basis, and that salary covers all time worked. I'm saying a majority of the counties handle it that way. Now, on our handout, we talk about exemptions. And to make a job exempt, it's got to meet one of three tests under the FLSA. The first being an executive exemption. These are people who are supervising, directing the operations of a major department or division within the county. The provision also provides for a salary test. As Wayne brought up earlier, back in 2016, a lot of counties were scrambling to meet this 47,476 salary threshold that the DOL had proposed. And a number of people were raised up to that salary in order to preserve their exempt status under the FLSA. Others were left to go non-exempt, and it was kind of on a case-by-case basis based upon the likelihood of people holding those jobs, working over 40 and being eligible for overtime. Some employees are going to work a lot of extra time, others are not. So I know a number of the HR people, the auditors, I know HR people in cities, they went through all their jobs to look at how they're classified, who's exempt and not making the 47,000, and made preparation or either changed salary ordinances and set them at those rates or left them alone based upon that proposed rule change. And right at the last minute, boing, that federal judge in Texas gave it the heave-ho. Everybody didn't think too much about it because they thought, well, whoever the next president is, likely Hillary Clinton, she's going to go along with this rule. Well, surprise, surprise. Now we're back to a situation where the new administration did not support that threshold, but the new labor secretary is saying we're not throwing the whole idea out the window, but we think that's too much of a raise all at one time. So, most people who are knowledgeable about this are predicting there will be a change in that salary test, but it won't be as great as it was proposed. So where that leaves us is what we have currently. $23,663 is still the salary threshold for an exempt employee. And nearly anybody in county government makes that now. So it's never really been a question as to whether or not they met the salary threshold at that level. It hasn't been changed in like 20 years. In all likelihood, it will go up, but right now, we're still under those same rules in terms of the salary test. So each one of the exemptions, executive and the other two, still require the salary threshold, but it's the $23,663. So we've got exempt positions, that's one prong in terms of being able to evaluate and make a job exempt. Many counties would look at that highway superintendent and say, that person does meet the executive test as a supervisor. And they're supervising, a major department of county government. Consequently, they are an exempt employee, and that's how they're treated. The other exemption is administrative, and it's defined here on page 2. Now, the administrative test sounds like it would fit every job in the courthouse under that umbrella. Not true. It's the narrowest of all the definitions under the FLSA. So you might have someone like a purchasing director, an HR specialist or director who would fit into this particular category, but it's very narrow. Most of the jobs throughout the county courthouse, the county annex, those jobs are going to be non-exempt. Most of them. A deputy in the clerk's office, the court reporters, deputies and auditors in the assessor's office are going to be non-exempt. Well, they're paid a salary. Yes, they are paid a salary. And that's another one of those little misnomers we have in county government. People interchange those terms. Well, they're all salaried, so we don't have to owe them any overtime. Wrong. To be exempt, you have to be paid on a salary basis. You have to be, if you meet the executive test, this administrative test, or the professional test, you have to be paid a salary. You cannot be paid on an hourly basis. Now, the non-exempt employees, that deputy recorder or deputy auditor, court reporter, they can be paid on a salary basis, or they can be paid on an hourly basis. Either way, but they're still, quote, non-exempt under the FLSA. And if they work overtime and they're paid on a salary basis, then we have to derive an hourly rate for that week that they work overtime. Now, most of you, and I think it's advisable to have that in your salary ordinance that says, okay, deputy auditor, here's a salary of $33,000, and here's the hourly rate for that job. Now, that hourly rate is going to be different from those counties that work a 35-hour work week to ones that work a 37 and a half to ones that maybe work 40 hours in a work week. So that rate is based upon the annual number of hours worked in the year. So if that's 40 hours, the work week is 40 hours, then that's 2,080 hours in a year to divide into that salary to derive the straight time hourly rate, which you would times time and a half as the overtime rate for that particular job. But I think it makes it much easier for administration purposes if you've got those rates set in your salary ordinance. Everything is clear, and people aren't standing in front of the payroll deputy in the auditor's office jumping up and down because they're not being paid properly. And I think that goes for all these basic rules that we have those in place. And I think not only in having the personnel policy handbook set out all these things, I think it's equally important, or maybe more important, for the county councils to have these salary administration policies appended into the salary ordinance as a term and condition of compensation. That way, when they're coming to the auditor's payroll deputy screaming, he says, look, this is our salary ordinance. I have to pay according to this. I can't pay you more. I have to pay you what it says according to these overtime policies that we have here. And the overtime policies that you may have in Carroll County aren't going to be the same as Henry. Every one of these policies varies a bit depending upon how the county calculates overtime. And I've had county attorneys and commissioners, well, I know you just did a policy for Fountain County, just give us theirs and we'll put our name in it and we're done. I'm thinking, well, it doesn't quite work that way. Unless you want to give the same amount of vacation time and weeks off and all that and calculate overtime the way they do in Fountain, well, maybe we better take a look at our own policy. Well, good idea. The third exemption is professional. To meet the professional exemption, these are jobs held by people who typically through a baccalaureate or higher education are applying what they've learned in their professional schooling to the work that they do. So we're talking here about attorneys, engineers, anyone that has any kind of a certification in terms of a professional certification that's required of the job are going to fit there. So you're going to have some. Do you have to meet all three tests in order to be exempt? No. All you have to do is meet one of the three. And again, most of the jobs in county government are going to be non-exempt. But in the ones that are on the far ends, county attorney, engineer, we know they're exempt. Truck driver, custodian, we know those are non-exempt. But you do have some in the middle that are on the cusp. And those are the ones that you really have to drill down and look at what the duties are and whether or not it supports having the job classified as exempt under the FLSA.
What about a paramedic?
Paramedic, non-exempt.
Non-exempt?
Mm-hmm. What about nurses? RNs require the degree, and they're looked upon, by and large, by most counties as being exempt. RNs or LPNs, non-exempt. Okay, and that's usually the distinction. Now, again, what I've found in working with a lot of health departments is we've always given the nurse overtime. Well, fine. But be prepared to look at some of the other exempt people. You need to be treating these people the same way. And I'll get these proposals, commissioners and others. We'd like to make this one exempt, but not that one. We want to give this guy comp time, but we don't want to make it for everybody else. You know, we want to take care of our highway superintendent. We love the guy. But that auditor's chief deputy's a pain in the neck. You know, it causes, no, we're not going there. So those are the basic three exemptions that the job can be classified. We've also got under FLSA some special rules for computer employees, and there's an exemption there. And this one gets a little tricky just because we're having to maybe compete with the private sector or others to get a good IT person, and we're paying them $70,000, $80,000, $90,000. That does not necessarily mean that they are also exempt. They're far over that salary threshold. They may be the highest paid person in the county. But if they're not really directing an operation, if they're doing a lot of help and hands-on work, and there's nobody else, and I know there's some counties that may only have one or a couple people in IT, there's a good chance that that job may be non-exempt. So we have to be careful in terms of how that fits within the scope of the IT department. So we've got those jobs that either meet these tests or don't. Now, the analysis to make that call really needs to be done through a process of developing accurate, reliable job descriptions. not just the list that my wife gives me on Saturday. That's a list that has to be followed. That's the one who must be obeyed, but it's not a job description, okay? The job description really needs to list out those essential functions and duties that are actually being performed by the employees. And really for use during not only FLSA, but for hiring, for promotions, for evaluations, for looking at the FMLA in terms of whether or not someone can return to work. So there's a number of pieces to a job description that needs to be covered. What are the weight restrictions or requirements of the job? They need to be in there. I know we had one county auditor call and says, you know, I've had the EMS person in today, and she's got some employees over there that want to make some revisions to the job description. Yeah? And what are they? Well, they don't like these lifting requirements, and they want to take that out. Now, I said, you're talking about paramedics and EMTs? Yeah? And you want to take out the lifting requirements? Yeah? So let's think about this in practical purposes. They come upon an accident in the middle of a highway. They've got people strewn all over the place, and they're just going to walk over and say, you better hop up on that gurney yourself, buddy, because, you know, that's not my job description. You can't make this stuff up. Go tell her no. I mean, but those are the kinds, well, what brought that on? We like to wait for those blue light guys, the volunteers, to come along. We give them that job of lifting them up into the gurneys. Well, no, this is the job. This is the requirement of the job. And again, these multiple purposes. Let's say that EMT gets injured or that paramedic is injured on the job and is off, and they're on FMLA or they're off on workers' comp, and all of a sudden the guy calls and says, well, we're coming back to work Monday. Have you got a release from your doctor? He said I could come back. You need to get releases. You need to make sure that when somebody's returning to work, that they're coming back and they're able to perform the full range of duties that are in those job descriptions. So therefore, the job description, I think under workers' comp or and the FMLA or ADA, needs to go with that employee to their medical provider, and the medical provider is making a decision based upon the job, not just what their patient comes in and tells them what their job is. That you are released to perform the full range of duties specified in Washington County's job description, or Carroll County's job description, or Clay County's job. You have to be able to do that. And I think too often, and Wayne alluded to it earlier, supervisors don't like to do this kind of stuff. They just kind of, you know, I think county government in Indiana is summed up with management by wishful thinking. I just wish she would quit. I wish I could trick the auditor into hiring this person. You know, maybe the next election will work, you know, just something. And we tend to back off. We don't have these confrontations, and things tend to fester and they get worse, and then it's the last straw, and by God, you're fired. Well, I'm on FMLA, you know. You can't. I do. I've seen a lot of these employees. It's like they have a sixth sense. They know when they know when that hammer is going to come down, and I am all stressed out, and I am going to find the doctor that says I need to be off for FMLA for 12 weeks. So, going through the process of making sure that the job descriptions are accurate, and that would include using a job questionnaire and preparing the descriptions. And question there, are you going to seek out and get some assistance with people who are knowledgeable about jobs in doing that? Or are you going to let the supervisors do the job descriptions themselves? That's your call. But I tell you, in this day and age, it's become a complicated process, and you really need to have someone who's knowledgeable about the job descriptions for preparation purposes and for maintaining them. So we prepared job descriptions in 1998, and they just sat there and collected dust, and now we're pulling them off the shelf and sending them off with the employee to their medical provider, and they go, whoa, 1998, are you doing all these things? No, those are ancient. I don't do any of that stuff. You need to maintain those descriptions, make sure that they're current, they're dated, and that the employee has signed an acknowledged receipt of the job description, not only for performance issues, but other things such as the FMLA and the FLSA if there is ever a dispute, because the job description should state on it whether or not it's exempt or non-exempt. Right, Melinda? Yeah, where did this one come from? I don't know. It says exempt here, non-exempt there. Got me. Somebody has made some alterations somewhere along the line. But that's the document that you want to have to support the decisions you make regarding overtime and who's eligible, who's not, and any back pay claims you'd get into. Question?
What if you got a person that's on workers' comp, and he's allowed to come back to work with restrictions? Because workers' comp, they call me, don't you have any kind of light duties he can do?
Everybody hear this? The question is, come back to work with restrictions. And do you have light duty? That's your call. Well, that's the county's call to have light duty or not.
And I'm talking about within the job description. It's not
Within the job description has the full range of duties and responsibilities that are required to perform the job. You do not have to change the job description to allow someone to come back to work. And I'll say, next step, if you do, be prepared to do it again and again and again, okay? You do not have to create a light duty program. Now, there's different schools of thought on that. Some people say, well, I'd rather have Joe sitting here counting bolts than have him, sitting home. Well, okay. I mean, that's one school of thought. But another school of thought is we don't want him or her coming back to work and not being able to perform the job and posing some risk to the other employees or themselves or the public. And particularly in public safety jobs, I think we want to make sure we have a release so they can perform the full range of duties. We can do this, 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 and this, but not this. No, you have to come back to be able to do the whole shebang. Had a sheriff who had one of the jailers was injured and off and wanted to come back, and then you can't come back to this job, not until you're released. And this was one of those where the sheriff was kind of thinking that some of this was bogus, and this guy was kind of an expert on going from workers' comp to FMLA to taking leave of absence without pay and knowing exactly when the FMLA date passes by, so they're going to ask for another FMLA. And I mean, got it down. He says, okay, I am going to bring him back. I do have another job, same pay. You can work in the control room at the dispatch. Oh, I don't want to be in there. That guy that supervises that thing makes people come to work on time. So, and then they make you work. So I'm going to be no, you can't be a jailer, but I can offer you this. Now, if they refuse to take that, then that's grounds for you to go sayonara. So, again, I can't overemphasize and reinforce what Wayne said earlier about having accurate and reliable job descriptions to use for a number of purposes. Chief among them being the FLSA. And as we get to page 3, FLSA exclusions. Now this is kind of a new, it's an old term, it's been part of the FLSA for a long time, but with the salary test being so low, it was rarely looked at until 2016. And that's when some of the county officials are going, hey, wait a minute. We've got chief deputies who are politically appointed who are going to have to be paid $47,476? Yep. They'll be paid more than the elected official. Yep. We'll have to raise the elected official salary. That, or you're going to have a ticked off elected official because the chief deputy is making more than they are. So a number of the counties looked at this. We engaged Tony Overholt here in Indianapolis, labor attorney at Frost Brown, and did a research paper on this, an opinion letter designating by statute which jobs under the state statutes meet this personal staff, politically appointed position. And that was the position a number of counties had taken in terms of classifying or designating chief deputies under those statutes. I know some counties do not consider or use the chief deputy title in that way, others do. And I think a lot of it has to do with a matter of size of the county, where a small county, everybody does everything and fills in and all that. Whereas in some of the larger counties where you have layers of people in these offices, and you do have chief deputies that have been historically considered the political appointee of the elected official, who perform the duties of the elected official in their absence, have all the bells and whistles of that authority of the elected official. So it's not just county by, you look at it county by county and how you've historically treated those jobs, but that was an option that a number of counties elected to take in terms of designating some of those chief deputies as political appointees of the elected official. Now, to just do that out of the blue without any communication, I think is a mistake. I do think, excuse me, that the description, there needs to be a job description for that chief deputy. And I think it also has to have all the duties that they perform, but a couple of key elements need to include things like a special statement, politically appointed, serves at the pleasure of the elected office holder, can be dismissed at any time with or without cause, and they're signing and dating it. And in the FLSA section, it says excluded. Chief deputy, excluded. Now, having that description in advance signed and understood, I think should be transparent. Because sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes, chief deputies get amnesia. How? Well, I was the chief deputy for the sheriff, but I was really out here on the road all the time. He was in charge. I didn't have anything to do with it. I just had the title, and we got this new sheriff now, so you can't fire me because I'm really not the chief deputy. I'm just an Indian like everybody else. No, that wasn't really what happened, but absent having some documented trail we stand at risk of having this big debate that could spill into a back pay claim or some kind of a political firing claim, all that kind of stuff. So it's advisable to have a description that details this, so when a chief deputy is hired and you're using that you're communicating day one. You know, if you come in knowing that you can be dismissed at any time, and you serve at the pleasure of that elected official. Now, there's not going to be very many jobs like that in county government, but there are some. I think at times it's easier to look at the state of Indiana or to look at city government in Indiana, where you have one chief executive, the governor. They have, they have merit and non-merit positions. If you're in a merit position in the state of Indiana, you have all these protections. Non-merit positions, you're the appointees. And the governor or the appointees can appoint positions, and it's clear. Everybody knows it when they come into the job. It's not so clear in county government as are a lot of other things in the way that this beast of county government's organized. So if we go down that path in excluding positions, we need to make sure that it's clear, it's communicated, and everyone's in agreement that that's what's taking place. Any questions on this? Yes.
Say like the sheriff, he's elected, he says, these are my deputies. I'll make the job descriptions when the county gets sued, it comes to the commissioners. Can we say, hey, this is the way it's gotta be?
Good question. When the sheriff decides what he wants to do on these descriptions, then when they get sued, then it comes back to the commissioners. That, unfortunately, is kind of the case on a lot of stuff. Having standardized policies, job descriptions, procedures, and enforcement in county governments like herding cats. We've got a lot of independents out there. And this is where the rubber always meets the road. What can we enforce and what can't we enforce? I think the issue here with the sheriff deputies, again, we go over here and they've got some protections that no other county employee has. And it's called the merit law. And merit police officers are hired under Indiana's merit law, which means the merit board has responsibility for setting policies and procedures for hiring, for promoting, disciplining, and terminating employees. Those things. Do they have the authority for setting pay? No. Do they have authority for granting 8 weeks of vacation to these guys while everybody else gets 3? No. Will they try to work that into their SOPs and convince the commissioners and the council that they've got that authority, and they scream and jump up and down and all that if they don't get it? Yeah, they'll do that. They'll do that. Will they show up at council meetings and try to intimidate the council? Yep. Commissioners? Yep. But again, if there's one thing to take out of this today, is something I've been preaching for a long time. Everybody needs to stay in their own lane, okay? We got commissioners staying in their lane. We get the council stay in their lane. We got everybody else stay in their lane. There isn't one county council person that I know of in Indiana who's ever gone in and told the circuit court judge how to run their court. You kidding? No. It doesn't happen. It's not going to happen. Whose job is it to set salaries? Council. How many people tell them what to do? Everybody. Everybody's an expert on that. By God, if you don't do it, I'm going to lose the best, all that stuff. Or we're going to get the blue flu, all that stuff. But, council's got that responsibility. And councils need to assume that responsibility, not try to pawn it off on somebody else, or it's not the commissioner's responsibility to tell the council how much to pay. Stay in your lane. But that's where things get blurry. I guess that's why I get paid. Yeah, people don't call me and say, "Can't those job descriptions really look nice today?" They go, "We don't have to pay this guy today. My God, you know."
Job descriptions, though, isn't that for the commission to approve, accept and approve job descriptions?
In Kent's world, the office holder would approve them, the commissioners would approve them, the council would approve them. Everybody would be singing out of the same hymn book. The problem we got here is each elective office is their own hiring authority. They assign the work of their people. They recruit and hire who they want. And speaking to those of you who are elective offices in the courthouse, do you like people telling you what to do? No. No. We don't like the auditor trying to be the boss of the county. Or the county council trying to be the boss of me. I'm elected. I can do what I want. It's in the Constitution. Week and a half ago, just a simple update of job descriptions for a county. Pass out questionnaires, instructions. Everybody's there. Yeah, we understand. We'll get it back. Judge wants to know why we have to do this. It's like, what do I do to have to deal with this today? But councils do have the rights and authority under their statutes to set job classifications and compensation and to hire people to help them do that. So that's theirs. So they ought to adopt, number one, they ought to adopt the job descriptions. Now, I think the commissioners, at the very least, need to adopt the job descriptions for the jobs that report to the commissioners. Okay, all the highway, that's theirs. They're in charge of those guys, and they ought to adopt those job descriptions, and they ought to establish some of the reporting relationships and hiring processes for that superintendent. Now, we've got some counties who the highway superintendent is just kind of there because each commissioner has his own, usually his own, road crew boss, foreman, supervisor, whatever you want to call it, that reports to them. Or we have other commissioners who take the approach that we hire the superintendent's in charge of the highway department, and they're the ones who set the workload, assign the schedules, evaluate employees, discipline if they will. So we've got this crossfire going in some counties where the commissioners haven't really relinquished that authority to the one person without, some interference. And I've really found that in those cases where each commissioner's got their own guy, it's a free-for-all. Well, my commissioner said we had to pave these roads today. Well, my guy said we were going over there. Well, you just take your guys and go there. What about the equipment? I mean, it's just, nobody's in charge. The highway superintendent's going, I think I'll go down to the courthouse and talk to the auditor. So. True? Yes.
Isn't there guidelines for what makes up a personnel committee?
Is there guidelines for what makes up
The
a personnel committee? In nearly, yes and no. I hate to tell you this, but these personnel committees, most of these handbooks are my invention, okay? Because we work in over 60 counties, and I've wrote a lot of handbooks. Personnel committees have been established to set up a mechanism for reviewing policies and making changes. I think by and large, the policies, most of the policies are under the commissioners, most. But that salary administration section and how much we pay for benefits, that's really council a little bit more than it is commissioners. So we've had these committees established. They work well when they work well when you have people working well together. But when you have a council and a commissioners that are like boom, boom, it's sunny out and no, it's raining, forget it. I mean, it doesn't work, or it impedes the ability. So I know at some policies we've left that or changed it back to the commissioners being the group that oversees the administration of the policies. Others include the council. Now, when it comes to the salary administration section of the handbook, there's also committees there in some counties where that committee is really comprised of it's a subcommittee of council to look at and review job classifications and compensation issues, that approves new job descriptions, that recommends changes or upgrades to a position where a job is going to change to the place where the pay really ought to go up in the salary schedule, and they make, quote, recommendations to the council. And many counties have used that as a means of having some process to go through, as opposed to the council simply sitting there with this blowback, all the elected officials appearing and making their case one by one. I've got to get Linda a raise because she's going to leave, and I've got the money. That's usually, I've got the money, and it's not going to cost you anything. We always hear that one. It's not going to cost anything. And I make my case, and I get 4 votes out of 7, I win, okay? Whereas having a committee or having an HR department who goes through this process and says, you know, this request for a change or an upgrade, it's going to affect all these other jobs across the county. So be prepared, council, that Joe made a great case for Linda, but get ready for next month, because we're going to have other people. And believe me, if there's anything that's true in county government, everybody's an expert about what's going on across the hall. They know. Did you hear what happened to council meeting last week? He came in and got Linda a raise. Well, I'm going in next month. You know, that's not right. And here we go. So council has the overview of the county in terms of compensation, but I think it's important to have some pre-established rules in place that everybody understands. There's a process for going through that. Under the FLSA, we've got this recovery of back wages and claims, and you can go back for 3 years if it's intentional. There's sometimes it's liquidated damages, then attorney's fees under federal law and courts are always, that's automatic. They get their fees. So I'm not an attorney, but you know, I know it's been kind of a moneymaker for a lot of people that sue county government with the county government. Any municipal government's looked on as having deep pockets, and you may be broke, but you can tax, and you're going to pay off these lawsuits. Records. Again, reinforcing what Wayne said earlier. Here are the FLSA record-keeping requirements on page 5 and 6. Well, page 5. These are not suggestions. Well, that's a good idea. to have these requirements, but that's not the way we always do it around here. Do you have to keep an electronic timekeeping system? No, it's not required. Is it advisable? I think so. Because if you ever have to defend yourself in an FLSA claim, you're going to have the documents to support you. And you're going to have to be able to tell whether someone was authorized to work overtime or whether they were not, or whether they've got this 360 hours of comp time coming to them. Of course, in my view, back to that highway superintendent with the 360 hours of comp time, that's over the limit. Even for a non-exempt employee, the limit is 240 for non-public safety employees. So that's the cap. You can't go over that unless you are a police officer or a correction officer at the jail, and that's 480 hours. But everybody else is the 240 threshold. Do we have to use comp time? No, you don't have to use comp time. What is the comp time? The crack cocaine of local government. Walked in the Henry County Council budget hearings last year, and the council president says, I remember the first workshop I went to, and you were there, it was about 12 years ago. You said, the crack cocaine of local government. Yeah, that's comp time. You don't have to use it, but if you do, there's restrictions. And one of the things that people need to get clear is that FLSA comp time is comp time for those hours over 40 in a work week. Not the hours 35 to 40. Those are not FLSA comp time hours. That's not part of the cap. That'll be most of the overtime that people are going to be working over their schedule if you've got 35-hour work week. But we're not really running afoul of the FLSA until we get over that 40 hump. So the advice is keep 2 buckets of time. FLSA comp time over 40, non-FLSA comp time for those hours under 40. And we had a call a week or so ago, the employee demanding that they be paid. No. You can have a policy that says we use comp time and we will pay it off when you leave. We're not denying we're not going to pay for it, or we'll let you use it. Do I have to use it only when I want to? No. If it's going to interfere with some kind of business purpose, we can say, no, you can't take it off. You can't have 5 people off on comp time at the same time, which was a federal case from Texas that went to the Supreme Court back in the good old days when the Supreme Court actually agreed on something in a unanimous decision. We won't see that for a while. Where the sheriff says, no, you guys can't all go fishing together on the same week. We got comp time, we can take it whenever. No, you can't. So they ruled the elected official can control that when you take it off. You can schedule it off. You can, if you've got a downtime and somebody's got a lot of comp time on the books, you can schedule it off. It's not just for people who want to take it off at their whim, or to have a kind of a comp time wink policy says, yeah, you can build it up so you can go do your farming in the summer and take all your comp time hours. It's not vacation. Now, it is earned and owed. It's not use it or lose it. Now, that's kind of another little misconception. Well, if you don't take it by the end of the year, you lose it. No, you don't. In fact, if we got a raise this year, it's going to be more valuable next year because it gets cashed out at the rate when you leave, not at the year that you earned it. under the FLSA record keeping is for non-exempt employees. So every once in a while we get this wise guy, department head, and like to, well, see, we don't have to keep track of time just for the non-exempt people. We're exempt. So we can come and go and do as we please. No, you can't. Under the Indiana wage statutes, all employees are required to keep track of the hours they worked each day. All of them. So it's not just under the FLSA that we're concerned. We're also concerned about these Indiana wage statutes and rules that are audited and should be audited by the State Board of Accounts. Judges, no. Judges or elected officials, which is another little folklore. I always get this question. I've read somewhere where every elected official has to work at least an hour a year. No. There's no requirement. You get elected, you get the pay, whatever that is. Now, we've had some lazy elected officials, and we've had councils that get ticked. I haven't seen the recorder for 5 months. Where is he? I don't know, Florida. This really happened. What can we do about it? Well, you set the pay. We can't cut his pay this year. No, you can't cut his pay this year. But boy, you can cut it next year. And they cut this recorder's pay down to about $5,000 a year. This council did. Until they got a new recorder that said, promise to God I'm going to work, come in, hope to die. I can't do it for $5,000, but okay. Yeah. Well, the other one I loved was the two commissioners in this county got beat in the primary. They proposed a budget to cut the salary of the new commissioners down to about $1,500 a year. And those two new guys come running into the council. You got to change this. They're in November and December. You got to change this. No, we'll pick it up next year. You can't. Yeah, we'll put it on our January agenda. Can't raise the salary in the same year. They were stuck with that salary for the whole year. God, didn't pay for gas. Can't make it up.
Any advice on elected officials that are highly trained and they've served their term, the 2 terms are termed out? You've got their wage up here to compensate them for their job. It's known that that's the wage for new candidates that run for the position, and they come in at the former person's elevated wage, and they don't have the experience to start with. Advice for councils on how that gets managed.
Well, we could all walk over to the legislature, and that's the beast of county government. That really is. Melissa?
Yeah, one thing that we do.
Let me get the mic too. Melissa, wait a second. Let me get the mic so the people in the video can hear you. It's too hard to try to repeat.
Melissa Stinson, everyone. Brown County knows everything there is about being an HR
No,
director.
no. But what we do is, well, not what I do. It's what council does. Council often gives a stipend to the person that is in that position that has that kind of education and that past. It only goes with that person, not with the position. So when they leave, the base pay is there and the stipend goes. So if they want to give the stipend to someone else who has that kind of education or training, they give it worthy of what the position is.
That's how we try to structure our managing the issue. But I guess the question is then when the candidates run into the clerk's office to file, all these things are public wages, so how is it being communicated from the clerk's office?
It just has to be that it's their base pay.
Right, yep, okay,
Okay?
thank you.
I'd like to flip to page 5 or 8 real quickly. FLSA compliance checklist. These are the things that need to be in your policies, need to be, I think, in your salary ordinances to comply with the FLSA. You have to establish a 7-day work week to measure time. You have to define what the work hours are, when they start, when they stop, whether or not the lunch is paid or unpaid or the mealtime is. You need to have definitions in that policy about what are excluded, what are exempt positions, what are non-exempt positions, and statements in those non-exempt and excluded that they're not entitled to overtime under the FLSA and shall not be paid overtime under the FLSA. Now, some counties say, well, we want to pay these guys something or give them some special comp time. You can do that, but you need to say it in your policy. The overtime policy itself needs to have all the terms and conditions like the actual hours worked, or if you're going to count certain paid days as hours worked in the calculation. Some counties will count holidays, but they won't count sick time, they won't count comp time, they won't count other times. So that needs to be clearly stated in the policy. The comp time, if it's used, and flex time, comp time are not the same thing, okay? Flex time is flexing your schedule, and I think for that work week. So Sharina says, look, I've got a doctor's appointment on Thursday afternoon. Would it be permissible if I worked through my lunch or if I stayed over on these other days of the week and took that off? I flex my schedule. I've got the required number of hours in for the week. I just didn't work the regularly scheduled set of hours each day. That's flexing the schedule. Those hours don't go into some bucket for me to use later. That's comp time. Comp time is something that is held on to, used at a later date. Multiple positions. Another trap, and that is if we've got county employees who work in more than one job in the county, they need to be bringing all their time together for those two positions. Well, one's for the courts, one's for the sheriff, we're the county. You're the county. You can't argue a separate employer. You are the county. So those hours have to be brought together, and if they go over the 40, then they need to be paid time and a half between the two. Well, who pays them? I would say whoever creates the overtime would pay them. The full-time guy didn't create the overtime, but the extra hours were this part-time job that they're doing over here on the side for somebody else. We had this when one county had security guys working in the sheriff's department. They're also working security in the park department on weekends. Well, that's two different employers. No, it's not. It's the county. We covered the job descriptions, the policies, the job descriptions all ought to be kind of connected together. And we need to maintain compliance. Again, hard to do, herding cats. Can't get this department to do anything around here. And that department's going to cost the county some money someday. Quickly go through the quiz with you. It's on page 9. Longevity pay, other extra pay, performance bonuses on call does not need to be added to the straight time pay when figuring the overtime rate. That is false. all pay. If there's any extra pay, it needs to be added. So if we're making base salary of $35,000 and somebody gets $2,000 in longevity pay, that needs to be added to the 35, and you're basing the overtime rate on the 37, not the 35. So any extra pay needs to be added to figure the overtime rate. The FLSA requires non-exempt employees to be paid at time and a half for all hours worked over 8 hours in a workday. False. It's 40 hours in a work week, actual hours worked. Now, you'll see some union contracts, which oftentimes get absorbed into the county policy that says 8 hours. That's not the FLSA rule. The FLSA sets a floor, not a ceiling. Like $7.25 an hour is part of the FLSA, it's minimum wage. We can pay more than that. We can be more generous than what the FLSA requires, but we have to be at least compliant with it. So if we want to pay somebody overtime after 8, the government's sure not going to care about that. Full-time jail or sheriff's department works 40 hours in the same week, 12 hours as security officer in community corrections. He or she is entitled to overtime pay at the rate of time and a half for the 12 hours over 40. True. Again, that's bringing those two together and figuring the overtime rate. Employers are required to establish a 7-day work week for the purpose of calculating overtime. Yes, true. Employees have sole discretion in deciding when they take comp time. No, false. Under the FLSA, non-public safety employees may accrue 240 comp time hours before monetary compensation is required. That is true. Can't go over the 240. Can a county set lower limits than 240? Yes. Do you have to use it? Do you have to use comp time at all? No. Canine officers are not entitled to any additional compensation for care, grooming, training of the dog during non-duty hours. That's false. We know that they are. County employees who hold FLSA exempt salaried positions must receive his or her full salary for any week in which the employee performs work without regard to the number of hours worked. This is false. They're not entitled. Now, in the private sector, yes, we can't deduct. They lose their FLSA exempt status. But the privates in the public sector, in order for someone to be paid, they have to use their available paid leave time. So if they've worked 30 hours and want to be paid for 40, that 10 hours is going to have to come from some vacation time or personal time that they have on the books. They can't just take off on Wednesday and be paid for the full day without using that time. This has come up several times in the last year in a number of counties where people have confused this with the private sector. We have these ghost employment laws that says you've got to use your available paid leave time in order to be paid. The auditor can't be allowing a check to be processed for someone who's not working. That's ghost employment to permit it. It's ghost employment for the person to take the money. So we can talk till we're blue in the face, but some of these people don't get it. And the problem is with this independent operation of I'm an elected official, that creates liability to the county that is very difficult to enforce. Even though the commissioners may have rules, the council may have rules, and then you have somebody going rogue, I'm not going to do it. Eventually, you'll end up paying the price. The county will, the taxpayers will, and the taxpayers probably don't. I guess if the taxpayers knew about some of this stuff, they go, holy moly, but they don't, and they probably never will. Yes, ma'am.
In the private sector, let me bring your mic up while you ask your question, please.
I'm not sure anybody else is going to care, but in the private sector, you can deduct a full 8 hours for disciplinary purposes only during that work week, if it's a disciplinary action.
You've got to have a policy to
Yeah,
do that.
Right. If it's in your policy and it's a disciplinary action, that's the only time you can get away with sending
Yeah.
somebody home for a whole day or 2 days.
Right.
Whatever, okay. Just verifying, because I'm really confused between private and public, because I know private, I don't know public.
You stick around with this group. Thank you. Anybody else? Any questions? Yes, ma'am.
Community corrections is paid through a grant, not directly by the county, so why would you count that as 40 hours?
Good question. In question number 3, funded through a grant, how does that count towards the hours? The funding source doesn't matter.
Okay.
They're paid a wage. They are non-exempt. They are entitled to overtime. Okay? I think outside of a director of community corrections, everybody else is probably non-exempt. They're subject to the same rules. It's just where the money comes from. It's funded out of a grant, no different than if it was funded out of user fees or if it was funded out of the general fund. That's just the funding source.
So the source doesn't matter.
Good
Okay,
question.
Thank you.
Is that because they're working in the same capacity as a security officer? Or
Anything in security has to be brought together. If it's similar to the kind of work that you do, it could be not security. It could be a bookkeeper, doing books in one office, doing similar duties in another office.
so deputy clerks working on election day for a county that does not have a separate voter registration office, is that similar? Could that be challenged? Could,
For just one day?
yes. For that day, are they still a county employee, or are they now out of the election budget as a separate?
You pay them wherever you want to pay them, but for those people, the FLSA has a provision called sporadic, occasional and sporadic, something like that that doesn't happen frequently. It's not going to change anything. Yes, ma'am.
Give me a second, please.
Hey, hold on. She's coming.
For the FLSA exempt employees, where is the language found that differentiates between the private and the public sector? Because I just was reviewing that last week, and I didn't see any mention for the public sector employees.
If you'll get in touch with me after this, we'll give you the citations on that section. And there's also a special section on the exempt employees having to work. We can't pay you if you're not working.
Hi. Back on the subject of ghost employment. So does the practice of giving an employee an hour of comp time, an hour and a half of comp time, 1 hour of 1.5 comp time, either in pay or in their comp time bank because they were a trainer, violate the ghost employment?
A trainer.
I'm going to be the person who trains the new staff member. I trained them for a full 8 hours, so my boss is going to credit me with an hour and a half of comp time because I functioned as a trainer.
No.
And I can choose to take pay, or I can choose to bank it and take the time off later.
I think what you're saying is that I would be getting some kind of a stipend bonus for being a trainer in addition to my regular pay or that 8 hours. But to say it's comp time,
And I can use it either way. I can use it as time off, or I can cash out time and a half pay for it.
I would say no. In any event, there needs to be a policy to allow any kind of comp time. But you're just giving comp time. They didn't earn it according to the FLSA. Okay. I think we're done.